How do institutions reflect the existing economic conditions or social norms? What structures adapt in response to the dynamic conditions surrounding institutions of education? Hello and welcome to the mini course titled Global and Comparative Education, sponsored by the UC Santa Barbara Orfila Center for Global and International Studies. My name is Travis, and I am a PhD candidate in education and research fellow at the Orfila Center. My research focuses on education policy, policy implementation, and program evaluation. This week, the course will cover the new institutionalism in educational contexts. We will focus on educational methodologies used to compare institutional quality across international educational contexts. The articles in this section consider issues related to new institutionalism and the implication on education policy, practice, and student outcomes. These concepts frame educational institutions as formal structures used to implement rather political ideologies. These practices and ideologies are situated within larger economic and political conditions. These conditions have implications for the ways that organizations within institutions prioritize policies to implement practices that might oppress certain groups unintentionally. Considering the implications of economic and political conditions on education, how do public policies specifically shape institutional reform? What policy initiatives have shaped the structural aspects of educational institutions? The politicized social realities of individual conditions shape school curriculum, student access to resources and knowledge, as well as activism and political participation. Institutional reform describes the process in which institutions organize new structures, and these processes and structures over time are typically ignored as indicators of organizational performance. However, the implication for ignoring these structural dimensions of the institution include failures at implementing larger policy goals or political ideologies. Institutional reform has long been observed internationally and remains a priority for researchers concerned with comparing reform movements in educational contexts. But how do institutional education institutions organize these reform movements across history? In previous videos, we discussed the sociology of education. What underlying strategies do institutions employ to implement reform? And how do these organizational processes and behaviors mediate policy and ideology backing institutional reform in the first place? By evaluating schools as organizations, we can begin to examine both formal and informal structures that enable institutional production. In educational contexts, this might include uncovering individual social behaviors, as well as the environments that structure that behavior. Organizational behaviors help educational researchers identify social interactions and structures that promote or inhibit learning in educational contexts. If school systems existed as organized systems, why does student learning vary across classrooms, schools, school districts, and/or national education systems so much? Geography provides one interdisciplinary perspective on the variation in outcomes across educational contexts. The physicality and location relative to the educational sites limit the political attention and resources that institutions can access. These geographical factors also influence the development of students outside of educational contexts by influencing their access to other forms of social capital that might influence how they navigate educational contexts. How do issues of new institutionalism affect education, and what sorts of issues specifically emerge in educational contexts because of new institutionalism? In the next video, we will cover real issues in primary and secondary education. Access the syllabus and research articles on my website. Here you will also find an active forum for weekly topic discussion. Are you interested in learning more about global and comparative education? Click the links next to this video to learn more about course objectives, activities, and requirements. Follow me and the UC Santa Barbara Orfila Center for more information about upcoming sponsored events related to global and comparative education. Thank you and see you next week.